I'm John Werner, host of the Cult of Christianity podcast. I explore the hard, unpopular truths about Christianity in the modern world. Join me as my guests and I discuss the nuances and subtle problems of evangelicalism in America. Cult survivors, religious experts, pastors, Christians, and everyone in between are allowed to express their views freely, but the Cult of Christianity podcast focuses on discerning the truth from lies, examining the root causes of these problems, and offering solutions. You can go to thecultofchristianity.com or find the Cult of Christianity wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's mini-series on the Cult Vault podcast. I'm your speaker, Casey, and for this installment, I'm sitting down with licensed marriage and family therapist, renowned podcast host, and cult mediator Rachel Bernstein to discuss our platforms and the work that we do in the world. If you haven't checked out Rachel's show, IndoctriNation, and you are a fan of this podcast, then you will definitely love Rachel's work too. If you are an Indoctrination listener and you found your way here to the Cult Vault podcast, hello and welcome. I hope you enjoy the show. Also, a massive hello and welcome to Nancy, Nicole, Alyssa, and Dylan, newest patrons who have signed up to support the podcast. I really appreciate all of you being here, and I hope that you enjoy your exclusive content. To support the show from as little as £1 a month and to gain early access to full-length and ad-free episodes, please visit patreon.com/thecultvault. CrimeCon 2023 is on the horizon, and I would love nothing more than to have a drink with some of the listeners in London on June the 10th and 11th. I have some special announcements for this coming soon, and tickets are selling fast. To get yours with a special 10% discount, you can use the code CULT at the checkout. And now, here is Rachel.
It is my pleasure to be talking to Casey from Cult Vault. I love the name of your show. It's fantastic. And this is going to be a nice crossover episode for both of us. So I'd love you to say hello, and then we will start our banter.
Hi, Rachel. It's so great to be here with you today. I've been a big fan of your work for a really long time, and I know that we've both had the honor of chatting to a lot of the same guests as well. So I am really excited for us to just talk to each other today and the differences and similarities of our shows and the work that we do in the world.
Yeah. And speaking about the world, we're in different parts of the world. And I always find that really interesting to be able to sort of decipher what speaks to people in different parts of the world. Sometimes when I put that out on the podcast, I hear from people from all over, and they will say, oh, I live in Germany, or I live here, or I live there. And this is what I'm worried about, or this is what I see, or this is what I think the people around me need to understand more. So maybe we can start with that, with your part of the world, and what are you seeing in your area?
Well, specifically in my area of the world, I am in Liverpool in the United Kingdom, and there is always a lot going on over here in regards to football. Over here, we have the red and blue, but it's a bit different to your red and blue, the Everton and Liverpool football clubs. And there's unfortunately occasionally stuff in the news about gun violence, which is quite shocking over here because, of course, we don't have guns and gun laws, or gun laws that allow us to carry any type of firearm. Also, we see a lot about the human rights movement, LGBTQIA community, and a lot of emphasis on growing marginalized community groups in Liverpool. And I think that's part of the reason why I love being here so much. It's a really inclusive community, despite what people hear in the news about football hooliganism and gun violence and the criminal underbelly of drugs and car thefts. We are so close to the water here where the ferry leaves for Ireland. A lot of cars are deported that way, and that's why it's a big hotspot for crime. But it really is such a beautiful and colourful and vibrant and inclusive city, and I absolutely love it. I moved here around 12 years ago, and it just stole my heart. So I'll have to stay here until I get it back. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. Specifically, what's happening in my area at the moment is lots of strikes. The bin collections are on strikes, and the trains are on strikes, and the nurses are on strikes. And I think that this is quite interesting because I've been thinking and talking a lot lately about disenchantment in society and how it's a very razor edge time in terms of vulnerabilities where people might be more susceptible than usual for falling into cults, high control groups, or the rabbit holes of conspiracy theories, which is something that I began to think about differently after coming to your ICSA panel this year.
Okay, good. So I have a bit of a Liverpool background, I suppose. I found out that actually some of my ancestors stopped there as they were coming by boat from Eastern Europe. But I studied there for a term in the 80s and was at the University of Liverpool and worked at the Liverpool Council for Voluntary Service and at a special needs school for really severely disabled children. They were so sweet, and they just really needed a lot of care. And I remember the Albert Dock having been this building that was, the windows were all broken. It was sort of a sanctuary for pigeons, basically. I took some black and white photos there that could have been from 100 years before because they looked very dated. And now I know it's a maritime museum and a shopping center and all these things. And I learned how to pronounce the Albert Dock. I had to learn how to say it just right. But it was a beautiful city, multicultural and gritty at the time, but growing into something beautiful. But there was a feeling of connection and camaraderie, and people know their neighbors. And that was new for me from where I was from in Los Angeles, where I knew people, but it's not that same kind of feeling. And I've thought about that a lot with people who get involved in organizations where they're looking for connection, they're looking for community, and how it might be so strong as a preventative measure if people sitting alone in their flats would have someone come by and say, "Hi, would you like to come for supper? Would you like to basically not feel alone in the world?" Because I think that does promote a lot of people being open to connections that are not necessarily healthy ones.
That is a really interesting observation because I spoke to Alexandra Stain just 2 days ago, and we were talking about how there's been a shift in social clubs and groups that people might join, and the pubs are closing down all over the UK, and social hotspots that people would typically have spent time in around the 70s and 80s don't really exist in the same way that they used to. A lot of people are buying cheap alcohol and drinking at home as opposed to visiting the pubs with the higher prices. So because there is less of that community vibe in a lot of English areas and areas of Britain, that could be a reason why there is an increase in coercive control cases in the UK. And I think that also extends to the growth in the digital age as well, and how easy it is for people to find some type of connection or community in a virtual sense as opposed to a physical sense, like you would find in a chess club or a social club whose numbers are dwindling at this point. So that's really interesting. I've just had that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it was very moving to me to know that I could be somewhere just for a few months and make connections and have professors who were really able to reach out. And I got invited to homes in Wales, but it was incredibly beautiful. And just being in someone's home where there was a hearth, but people taking the time, making the effort, I think so much would be cured because of that and prevented because of that in general. Because I know I talked to many people who will say I stayed for much longer than I realized I should have just because I didn't want to leave a community. And that's very powerful.
I really love that you've been able to experience the culture of the city, even if it was a long time ago. And just to be able to explain to you where I live, and then for you to say, yes, I've been there, and I felt the same way, means that I'm definitely correct in the effect that the city has had on me as a person. It really is a wonderful place to be. And it's funny because it's very much a Labour constituency, and there's been a call for Liverpool to go through its own independence a vote so that it can become sort of its own region, which I thought was quite funny. Independence for Liverpool. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but yeah, it's a wonderful city. I love being here. And Betsy Coed, that's another example of how you can go from Liverpool to Wales, which is a different country, in sort of a 30-minute drive, and it's absolutely beautifully picturesque in Wales. It's phenomenal just to be able to take that drive and be out of the city and into the countryside, where some of the most beautiful areas of the United Kingdom can be found.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And of course, I had to take a ferry across the Mersey because I had to because of the song. So it was really lovely. I wonder about you, and I know you've talked on your own shows about this, but what brings you to this interest and wanting to also make your mark in being a resource to the public?
Absolutely. I find myself in a position that was never intentional. I started the podcast during the first phase of lockdown with a newborn baby and a partner that had a full-time job that he had to continue doing throughout the pandemic, and no support from outside sources. No friends or family could come and visit, and really just needed something that was separate to motherhood, which is the greatest gift to me. I absolutely adore being a mother, and my children are both so beautiful. But sometimes, especially when you're breastfeeding, it can feel like very overwhelming. And when you're stuck in the house and you can't leave, and you're just in the same routine, which is very good actually for babies. Routine is very good, but sometimes it can be a little bit stir crazy for me. I don't want to speak for everybody, and I think it's okay to feel that way. It's sometimes, I think, taboo to talk about how it's difficult to be a parent, but it is difficult to be a parent, and it's okay to feel like sometimes you want a little bit of distance or a break. That's completely normal and natural, I think. So I tried baking and that didn't work. And then I tried knitting and then that didn't work. And then I was emptying a box in one of our spare rooms, and I found this old room mic and a load of notes that I'd made on unsolved mysteries. And I thought, oh yeah, I had that really funny idea that I was going to start a podcast. And then I thought, well, why not start a podcast? I see if that works. See if that, itches the scratch of something different, of a hobby. And I was speaking to my friend on the phone who had just finished reading Jenna Miscavige's memoir about her escaping Scientology. And then she said, you should read the book and you should do a podcast on cults. And I thought, wow, yes, cults are interesting. And so I did my first few episodes on infamous cults from history, and then thought I knew everything there was to know about the subject, and did the whole Dunning-Kruger thing, where I then got approached by a woman named Helen Zuman, who I'm sure you've spoken with before.
Mhm.
And she said, I've actually written a memoir about my time in a group on Zendik Farm. Would you like to read it? And I said, yes, please. And I read the memoir, and she's such an incredible writer. And I said, Helen, would you consider coming on my show? And she said, yes. And I was like, my back was dripping with sweat throughout the whole interview, and I was so nervous. And I called it a sex cult at one point, and she told me off. And she was like, well, actually, that's incorrect, because it was a group that had a radical take on sex and relationships, but it wasn't a sex cult. And I will always remember that line in my head. And that was the first of many, many corrections and lessons on my journey to where I am today, which I appreciate, because how can we grow and how can we become better informed if we're not willing to listen to corrections when we make mistakes? So then I realized, after speaking with Helen, that there was so much more to the subject of cults than I'd ever considered before, that I'd even been thought to believe existed through watching documentaries and films. And after I released my interview with Helen, more and more people started emailing with the wish to share their story. So the podcast just kind of changed from there. Helen's entrance into my life changed the trajectory of the show and my life now, because I can't see myself doing anything different. I feel like I'm almost 3 years into this now and 200 and something episodes later. And it's almost like I've self trained in a new industry because I'd never had experience in podcasting before. And now here I am outside of the lockdown as a full-time podcaster.
It's quite amazing. I have something similar where I never thought I'd be doing a podcast. So when you talked, first of all, about the challenges of being a mom, even though, you're loving it and, and loving these new human beings tremendously, it is okay to admit that you need a break or you need to have adult conversation or you just need to have quiet time or you need to just be thinking about nothing in particular and no one in particular. And that's okay. And then you can come back refreshed and then be more present and be the mom you want to be in a greater way. And what I find interesting about that is just being able to say, this is how I feel, and it's okay. Most of the population that I deal with, they don't have that luxury. They are told how they're supposed to feel about things. And if they don't feel that way, they're thinking and feeling wrong. And it's punishable somehow by the leader or by God or whatever the philosophy is. So I think people who have never been in a cult experience don't realize how huge it is. Huge for you to be able to say, you know what, I have this thought and it may or may not be a popular one, but it's true, it's real, and it's okay for me to feel it. I mean, that it's such a symbol of freedom to be able to do that, and one that I think people don't realize in terms of just how important it is to have and how that's taken away when you're in a cultic system. And then the idea of something not being a sex cult. I also learned from hearing people who are in many groups that the media then would just sort of get it to this moniker of sex cult. And then it became very difficult for people to want to come forward and say, I was in this group, because now it's connected to this term. And for some people, it's not at all about sex. Often it's, that's not either the intention or that's not why they got involved. And it might just be happening to some of the people there. I also learned about the term victim. There are some people who take offense to the term victim. So I'm careful not to talk about someone being a victim of a cult, but I'll ask them how they refer to themselves in relation to their experience. Because not only there's nothing wrong with the word, and some people are fine with it, and they say, yes, that I was victimized, so I can call myself a victim. But for other people, I think they're not wanting to be classified. And also with a lot of these large group awareness trainings at EST and LifeSpring, et cetera, there's the real pathologizing of the word victim, that you have to sit in the victim's row. And if you were abused as a child, then you're kind of getting into your victim self. And somehow that's a put down. So, all these words are so charged. So it's interesting that you had that experience, and it's good to be open to that. I've needed to do the same.
Yeah. And I think I was researching Zendik and Zendik Farm, and it was actually in an article that had sex cult in its title that led me to then use that in the interview with Helen. So you're exactly right. And a lot of my education has been trying to change how I perceive, think, feel, approach the subject of cults and coercive control in regards to individuals who have been through this lived experience as somebody that does not have the lived experience, and also having to understand that as I learn more, I reflect on interviews where I think, oh, I've said something similar to that, which is so inappropriate. So I've never wanted to be the type of content creator that says, if you don't like the podcast, don't listen. I don't think that that's helpful for me. It's not helpful for the listeners, and it's not helpful for future guests that come on the show. We absolutely in this space have to be receptive to constructive criticism and corrections in our language. Otherwise, I'm not licensed, you're licensed, and I can't work in a kind of therapizing or counselor position. And I make a real conscious effort not to say anything that's armchair diagnosing, to not give any type of therapy advice to anybody. And that's because we have an ethical obligation not to do those things if we're not trained or licensed to do them. So it's really trying to juggle so many things inside your mind about using sensitive language, using sensitive terminology, addressing guests in a way that they feel comfortable, but also trying not to assume things about their experiences based on what we've consumed from the media. Because I used to binge true crime documentaries and podcasts and not even really think about the people whose stories were being told. And that makes me feel so uncomfortable now after speaking to so many people and realizing that every single person whose story that I've listened to for entertainment purposes has a family, has their own children, their own parents, has so many people that have been affected by the events that took place against that person who may not even be alive anymore. And so I am incredibly thankful for the education that I've received through every single episode that I have had the opportunity to be a part of, because now I can truly try and make a conscious effort to not only change the perceptions of those that join cults or people born and raised in cults who, I wouldn't have even considered before I started the show. Nobody's born into a cult. People just join them. And it makes me like my butt cheeks clench because it makes me so uncomfortable now that that's how I used to think. But if I'm having this education, it's my hope that people that have been with me through this journey have had that same education. And so we're all learning and changing and having conversations with people outside of the podcasts that hopefully then has some kind of domino effect on them thinking about cults and coercion differently as well.
There's something really very powerful about apologizing, and not just apologizing, but having it mean something, meaning that you then shift how you are and what you're doing so that you don't do that again, whatever that is that bothered someone. Because with all the families I've worked with over the years, one of the things that stays with children is saying that their parents never apologized for the things they did, or they never took responsibility, they never acknowledged. Same thing happens in cults. So you don't have a cult leader who apologizes, who takes responsibility. It's all back on you. So there's something actually monumental without you realizing it for you to say, "Oh, thanks for letting me know. I'll be careful about that, or I won't use that." That might seem like a very lovely, generous thing to do. But for someone who's never had that in their life before, I think they suddenly feel safe. They feel heard. They feel like their feelings mattered. It's very big. And it doesn't take a lot to apologize, but it only means something if it shifts your behavior in some way. And I mean, there was actually one person who said, "No, no, you have it wrong." My cult leader apologized for things, and I said, "So can you give me an example of an apology?" Was, yeah, they would say, "Well, I'm sorry if you misunderstood what I was saying. I'm sorry that you are so weak that you couldn't tolerate what I was trying to do for you." That's not an apology. It's just reinforcing of a message that the person wants to get across to you, and it's an insult. But came out like an apology, but it really wasn't one. So it's more of that kind of tricky language that we see, very slippery language within manipulative relationships and within cults. I'm wondering about some of the stories you've heard about people who were kind of taken in by that kind of slippery language, thinking that the person they were dealing with was really fair-minded or kind, but at the end of the day, really were not. I'm sure you've heard some of those stories.
There's been so many different stories that are similar in that vein. And I think what is interesting to me when I do the show is I find people's stories interesting, and I find the connections that you can weave from one group to another absolutely fascinating. I can't seem to stop myself from thinking or saying, "Oh my goodness, that sounds just like such and such who was in this group when this happened to them." And my mind is just always connecting all of these dots. But the group that sticks out for me the most in terms of the insidious use of language to say one thing and do another, or to say something that actually later on means something else, is Shinchunji. And they have this worldwide process that they apply to all of their groups in all of the countries that they exist within, where they proselytize mostly on university campuses. And they invite people to something that seems innocuous, a Bible study. And then they ask individuals if they want to commit to 12 weeks of Bible study. And then after those 12 weeks, they invite people to a session where they reveal to the individual that all of those other newbies that joined the Bible study alongside them are actually historical members of Shincheonji who have all been reporting back to the Bible study teacher your movements, your thoughts, your feelings about Bible study, about the group, about whether you're going to stay on after your 12 weeks. And then it's revealed to them that actually the name of the group is Shincheonji, which they haven't told you up to this point, and that they believe in a South Korean Messiah, and then go on to tell you all about Lee Man-hee. And I just think that it's also cloak and dagger, and it's all so restrictive in the information that is given, or the information is manipulated in a way to make you think that it's something different to what it is. There's a lot of stuff in the media about it now in regards to New Zealand and Australia trying to get some type of legal framework in place to tackle groups like Shincheonji because of the nature of the information control. So in regards to tricky language, I think it's that group that I come back to more times than not.
It's interesting. And so that's a group that we haven't yet talked about on this show. So, yeah, if you can let us know a little bit about the group, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Shincheonji is a group that originated from South Korea and was created by a man named Lee Man-hee. So according to SCJ, which it's shortened to, Shincheonji has around 300,000 members worldwide. And the creator Lee Man-hee is the figurehead of the group, although people typically in these smaller Bible study classes who after 12 weeks they take a test and commit themselves to Shincheonji, they don't meet Lee Man-hee. He is somewhere else living a life of complete luxury from the money that he gets from running a high control religious group. And interestingly, if you look at the tenets of Shincheonji, a lot of it is either stolen from, inspired, or just happens to be very similar to the Unification Church and the World Mission Society Church of God, both of which also originated out of South Korea and have South Korean leaders who present themselves as messiahs. So I think that that is fascinating. That's the sort of stuff that gets me sort of like, okay, so what year did they all become established religions, and when did parts of their core doctrine change, and did it happen to follow suit after, the Unification Church, being the biggest of the three, made changes to their own structure and their own dogma? And I think that that is really interesting. But the more that I learned about Shincheonji, the more that I realized that there is a lot of cultic language within the group that we wouldn't necessarily understand as lay people sitting in a coffee shop next to one of these Bible studies taking place. So they have WhatsApp groups made up of leaves and fruit. So if I was to be approached on university campus and asked typically something like, do you believe in God? Or are you looking for a social club to join? And I answer yes. And then the person says, well, I'm going to a Bible study later. Maybe we can go for a Bible study one-on-one. Do you want to go and grab a coffee? And I say, sure, let's grab a coffee. And then after a couple of these coffee meetings, I'm invited to go to a Bible study class. And the class is made up of 6 to 12 people. And I'm told that within those 6 to 12 people, myself and 10 others are all new members. They're all university students and they're all looking for exactly the same thing as me. And then there's a WhatsApp group that is created. I am called a leaf. I am a leaf because I am not yet a fruit. So the leaves have WhatsApp groups named after them. So there's a WhatsApp group called Casey. And within that group, all of the other members of Shincheonji who are posing as leaves, but actually are established members of the religion, they all contribute bits of information to this WhatsApp group that I have absolutely no idea exists. They're swapping information on my routine, my friends, how I think and feel about the Bible study sessions. And then the Bible study teacher comes to me with this almost enlightened, omnipotent knowledge about me struggling in my psychology class or me having difficulties with my boyfriend. And that of course, only feeds into my belief that this is the place that I should be. And then after those 12 weeks, you're invited to this small ceremony where it's revealed to me that all the other leaves in the Bible study group are actually members of Shincheonji, and they couldn't tell me because they needed me to find my own way, and they needed me to make sure that I knew that this was the right decision for me to fully commit myself to the group. And they were so worried that if they would have told me the truth, I never would have been able to make that journey independently. So this is kind of what I mean when I say that the universal tactics that are used around the world by this group, it doesn't matter if you speak to somebody from America, if you speak to somebody in Australia, if you speak to somebody in the UK, the MO of Shincheonji is exactly the same. And it's, again, that tricky language and positioning it as if they were doing me a favor. So these established members of Shincheonji that are posing as leaves, they are called fruit. And the fruit go out and they proselytize to find leaves, and then the leaves become the fruit, and then the fruit is deployed to use exactly the same recruitment tactics that was used on them in the first place.
Wow. Okay. That whole idea that they withhold information from you for you is very trippy. That whole idea of like lying by omission or commission for your benefit is sort of across the board. If you had known, then you wouldn't have gotten involved, and then you couldn't have been saved, blah, 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 blah. It really is just blah, 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 because it's meaningless. Because ultimately, the way I think people can be treated most respectfully is by being able to make a fully educated decision. And without all the information, you can't make that. But to know also that that's built into the system, that it's withheld from you for you, but really it's to entrap you. Then if there's a way that people could sort of change the pronouns in their mind, that if you're being told this is for you and you can hear, this is for them. And if you can translate that each time, sort of switch it around in your mind, that something is being done to you and you're told that it's for you. Okay, no, maybe it's for them. Maybe it's for him. Maybe it's for the organization. Let me see how that would work for them. And to try to evaluate that in the moment, because also, I mean, it's interesting. There's so many layers to this, because then if you feel like information is being withheld, you won't mind if it's withheld again and in other ways, because you'll trust the system that it's being done for your benefit. And so then you kind of learn to not be bothered by it. And you also learn to not explore, to find out information, because you know that if you can't gain access to it somehow, that's for your benefit. But it also sets up reciprocity. Then you might feel like you want to give back to this group that is doing the heavy lifting, like they're knowing what they need to withhold from you in order to save your soul. So you're then in a position where you feel you have to be grateful and thank the people who are keeping you in the dark. Wow.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah, yeah. And of course, we spoke earlier and you talked about how important community is. I remember how much my life changed from moving from a tiny, tiny little seaside town where everybody knew everybody up to a major city like Liverpool, and how much my life changed in those first 12 weeks of university. I was in a completely different place in the country. I was away from all of my friends and family and everything that I'd ever known. I was being offered alcohol. I was working in a bar back home, but it wasn't interesting for me to drink because I wasn't in that social environment. These individuals, 12 weeks after being a part of this community where the love bombing is happening, where they are being treated like they are VIPs within the Bible study group, 12 weeks is a long time for an individual in that environment to then be told that the withheld information was for their benefit, to then say, well, actually, do you know what? It's not for me. There's so much that's already happening in terms of deepening an individual's involvement that is so much more than withholding that information, which is already so difficult to wrap your mind around, I think.
Oh my goodness, yes. And also the idea that there are people who are posing as first-time students and who are not. That also happens almost across the board. And someone is collecting your information, siphoning it off to the leadership, posing as someone who's just interested in you and engaging you in a conversation, and you're opening up to them because you think they're in the same position you are, and just as innocently there as you are. It's reminding me, there's a group called the Kabbalah Learning Center, and I went to go investigate it when people were coming to me saying that they had had certain experiences that they thought were problematic there. They're all over, but there was one near me, and I went to go check it out. And they also said the same thing. And so I know to know now that that's not true. And they say, "Oh, thank you. You're all new students here, and this is your first time. Welcome." So I'm thinking, okay, so there are people in the room who are there, who have been planted there, who are going to be watching, who are going to be engaging in conversation. And I thought, okay, I want to sort of know who they are if I can figure this out. And so I remember I had to keep a chart. It was hard to remember this. I had to write it down under the table, actually, who I told what to. And I shifted the story each time. So then I would know if it came back to me who the person was who told it, who wasn't new there like I was. Once you sort of learn, you kind of get into the head of a PI, I guess you sometimes need to do that.
I was just thinking private investigator. That was what I was just thinking. Yeah.
Right, because I thought, who is really the person here who's being used? I mean, they're being used. There are victims in this story too. They think they're doing the right thing by pretending to be something they're not. So already you're given carte blanche to basically lie to others and to deceive them, which a lot of people leaving cults feel very bad about. They know they were utilized in this way and they feel very bad about it. But it wasn't too hard to figure out who that person was. When I went back I had to go then back for a second meeting so I could see who would approach me with what information. I knew who the plant was. But I thought this shouldn't be happening at all. I mean, there's a part of me that thought, okay, good on me that after a couple of decades of doing this, I've sort of learned the system. But what? This shouldn't be happening at all. People are going to a spiritual organization or whatever it is because they're hurt, because they're feeling alone, because they're scared, and they just go right into this machine and don't realize it. It's really wrong.
It is, and it's a nuanced thing by this point. It's a tried and tested methodology that is probably more successful than not. And what comes into play there in my mind with these types of environments where there are plants in the audience or in the group is also the kind of Solomon Ash conformity aspect of things. Because if everybody else is saying, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard, I wish I had access to this information 10 years ago, this is going to change my life. And you're sitting there thinking, I didn't hear anything that sounded like that was going to do that for me. But if there's a number of people in the room who are all echoing those sentiments, then you start to think, oh, maybe I'm interpreting things wrong. Maybe this is the best thing in the world. Oh my goodness, I'm so lucky to be here. There's so much that goes on. And I find it so fascinating deconstructing all of these things, but then think to myself, how does anybody ever have a chance when it's not just one manipulative tactic that's at play, but several that all interlink and all bolster each other into creating an airtight grip on an individual who is at their most vulnerable? Perhaps it's interesting, but it's deadly sometimes, these combinations of manipulation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is at its extreme, and that is what's possible. And that's why it's good to, keep track of these groups and watch as much as you can. But I like the way you said that. Yes, it's airtight. And then you have the people who are so enthusiastic and you wonder why you're not, and you wonder what you're missing. There is this idea of the majority being so influential. And if you feel like you're the only one, it's very hard. And you also can sometimes have people turning on you. I had that one time when I was on jury duty, when I was the only one. It was like a 12 Angry Men situation where I was the only one who really thought this person was innocent. And meanwhile, I was nursing at the time and I really needed to go home. And it was a Friday afternoon. I knew there was going to be traffic and I was in pain, but I thought that's not enough of a reason to send someone to jail. And people did turn on me because they really wanted to go home and they wanted conformity and I thought it's so interesting that if it mattered to me that they didn't like me, I could imagine voting along with them, just because it would make my life easier. But then I knew it would make this man's life a lot harder, that there wasn't enough evidence to put him away, but people were just, afraid of being disliked in the jury room. Really? That's a reason? I think it's hard though, also because there's this social contagion. And so even if people are not enthusiastic at the beginning, they become so. And I don't know if that's something you've come across where people said they were sort of caught up in something because the people around them were.
I think that immediately I think of Spencer Schneider, and I think about his experiences in the esoteric school that Sharon Gans led in New York and Boston. And the reason I think of Spencer is because when he was initially approached and told about this secret group, he wasn't interested. He told the guy where to go, basically. And then he felt so bad about how he'd spoken to the guy that he went back to him and said, "Okay, yeah, I'll give it a try." And I just wish that he hadn't. But, when I think when that's the kind of thing that I go straight back to when you mention somebody that really wasn't on board to begin with, but then Spencer was involved in this group for over 20 years after that initial meeting that he went to. So I think that just goes to show how our human nature can win out when we feel like we might have upset somebody.
How interesting. Right. So then I think about the people who judge people for getting involved in things like this. And really often it's these stories. It's someone just being a mensch, someone being nice. But there are people who have a code that they follow by that dictates how they behave. And he felt bad about how he was and how he interacted with this person. So then he acquiesced. It's often these very wonderful, lovely qualities that are the ones that are tapped into, or the ones that hold you to a certain standard that then a manipulator can absolutely take advantage of.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then that makes me think of Durette Bouillon when I think about her good nature and how warm she is and how open she is and trusting and all of those qualities that Durette has astonishingly been able to hold on to despite her experience. All of those qualities were exploited when she came into contact with the leader of the group that she became involved in for a large amount of her life. So again, absolutely spot on, Rachel. Your insight is just amazing. I love how you're able to this is incredible. I mean, I guess that's what happens after years and years and years of working in the field as a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Well, thank you. Some of it comes from just listening and making the connections and meeting people face to face and seeing that these are the people who might be looked down upon by society, but I'm looking up to them. They have these wonderful core qualities. And you're right, some of them still do after what they've been put through. So it shows that that's really just who they are, which is quite incredible. I mean, I don't know how people do that, but the resilience and the tenacity to just stay who you are, it takes a lot of bravery.
That is the end of part 1 of my conversation with Rachel Bernstein from IndoctriNation Podcast. To find Rachel's show, please follow the link in the episode description. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault Podcast.